For me, a real key point is we're all on this journey, and we're all doing it together, but we're all at different stages, if you will. And the real critical thing here is, from my perspective, when we started talking about doing this staff ride, you know, we had a lot of objectives, but really the bottom line objective was to open the door. And I think we've been successful. It doesn't mean that it's time to close the door now. We just cracked it open. This is going to continue to be a discussion for years. We've talked about, we know there is more information out there. We can't get everybody to the table. Not everybody is ready to come to the table yet, but hopefully by opening the door, next year, 2 years from now, whenever that might happen, we might get more information. We might be able to talk some more about something else. This is probably one of the more complicated incidents. We've talked about it this morning at all the different levels between management and the agency and the stuff that happened on the ground, the small towns, communities, Salmon Chalice, I mean, it's all there. It's really, really gratifying to see everybody that came. Because Cramer is an agency fire. It's not a Salmon Chalice fire. And the more we can talk about it as an agency, as multiple agencies, as the wildland firefighting community, the better off we're all going to be.
The Cramer Virtual Staff Ride participants spend one entire day learning about this notable and significant fatal incident as they move through 6 separate staff ride stands. Stand topics include the fire and fuels history of the Salmon Chalice National Forest, the extra busy fire activity that the Forest Service was already experiencing when the Cramer fire ignited,
this thing is really getting ahead of steam,
the fire chronology leading up to the fatalities, and a variety of aftermath perspectives shared by several supervisory personnel.
You don't have the money, you don't have all the resources.
By the way, this staff ride was called virtual because due to the logistical difficulties of trying to visit the high elevation, trail access only Cramer Fire location, it was decided to present these stands off-site.
These types of fuels with the terrain, with the fire weather, generate extreme fire behavior. And on the Salmon Chalice National Forest, that's what it's about, is stand replacing fires, fast moving fires, and high severity fires.
I'm here kind of representing the IC role and kind of the pre-Cramer history of this area from the standpoint of kind of the IC role, strategies and tactics that are appropriate and that we used in the past in terms of the Salmon River breaks. And I have a long history. And a lot of it isn't the best of histories from the standpoint I was on a number of these fires that had problems, entrapments, burnovers, and so forth. And I can't stress enough how, I guess, emotional that is. It is something that is life-changing. And when you look at what these fires can do, and you were there and experienced it as part of a team, and it was your responsibility to anticipate, keep people safe and out of harm's way, and it didn't go the way you thought it would, you really do some soul searching and you go back and look for answers. If you look at this chart here, and this is what every firefighter really should know from the standpoint of these principles, it's that when we get people in trouble, it's almost always associated with the wind event. It happened long before the wind event. We put those people in harm's way before the wind event, and we should have anticipated or said we need a logical sequence of suppression action to avoid getting them in those positions. And does anybody know what that logical sequence is? What do we teach in basic fire school? One into black. Anchor. Anchor, flank, and pinch. That concept is very simple, but it is extremely hard to apply in this terrain and in these conditions. What was the suppression objective of the folks on Cramer? And are they looking at these principles, and did they apply them? What would you do different? You'll get the chance to look at some of these examples. As this fire and this chronology progresses, we're not here to criticize. We're here to say, what can we do to avoid this thing from happening again? And when something changes, this little slop over that occurred into the cash bar drainage is a showstopper. It now says, we don't have the ability to pick this ridge up any longer. Where do you go from there? Are you going to be able to contain it in here? Where's your next spot? You got to back off to the next ridge. You just can't pick it up in here. So what did that mean from a plan standpoint? What would you do if it slopped down into this? What would you do?
So Ray and I were going to be flown into H1. We also had 5 individuals off the engine crew that were going to be shuttled in once we got on scene. What we were looking at was, hopefully our main goal was to secure this west ridge so that the incoming IC3 would have something to anchor into when he got on scene the next day. We realized we only had 7 people, 25 acre fire that was going to grow through the night, was going to roll out. We weren't going to be able to get around the thing, so that was the main goal, just be able to hand the IC3 something that they could work with the next morning. Once Ray got the 5 personnel into H1, they ended up coming up to H1's right down in here. They ended up walking up to this vantage point to where they could see the bottom of the fire, keep a watch on this drainage. As I was coming back down and as I was walking up through there, cliffed out quite a few times. We were getting significant rollout. From the top to the bottom, you'd hear either rocks or trees let loose. If you timed them, you'd be getting rollout for 20, 30 seconds consistently. So stuff was moving within there. At that time, we didn't feel comfortable engaging the fire just because of the terrain and the way the fire was burning. And it was so dark, like I said, quite a few times I cliffed out, ended up having to walk back quite a ways just to be able to get back down to the rocky point. So around 1 o'clock, I believe, we bedded the crew down because dispatch's intent was to be able to utilize them for initial attack the next day. So from that time on, I ended up setting up right around here as a lookout. Ray was on a point over here, so we had eyes on the fire, so we didn't have to worry about whether the thing was going to sneak up on us through the night. Just watching the fire throughout the evening, significant fire behavior for the time of the day that we were experiencing. About 1:30, I took weather readings and it was still 73 degrees up on the hill. So we were obviously in that thermal belt that you guys were discussing down at the other station. Before we actually got on the fire, just to fill you guys in, we did order up the Type 3 IC, and Air Attack had placed an order for 2 hand crews. At about 1 o'clock, 1:30, Ray and I placed an order for an additional 2 hand crews, just with the understanding that this thing was going to significantly grow. Weren't going to be able to get around it, so wanted to get those resources on order. Approximately 5:30, we started getting enough light to where Ray felt comfortable to come up, walk the perimeter of the fire on the eastern flank, and then tie back in with me on the west ridge. At about 7 o'clock, I called in a spot weather forecast to dispatch. We got it about 9 o'clock as we were hiking back to H1. You guys probably saw the weather readings, or expected weather were high temp of 101 degrees, low RH of 11% humidity, and winds were predicted for 4 to 8 miles per hour. From what we saw the night before, we didn't feel that was going to be fairly accurate. The evening of the 20th, we saw winds 10 to 20 miles per hour. So we thought the 4 to 8 was definitely on the low end. Discussed that with amongst ourselves and noted that we'd brief the incoming Type 3 IC on that whenever he got there. So incoming IC ended up flying the fire approximately 10:30 on the 21st. Got on the ground, we gave him his in briefing around 11 o'clock, transitioned with him, handed the incident organizer over, and again notified him that we thought the winds were going to be significantly different from what we had experienced or what the spot weather was predicting.
So on the day of the 22nd, we started shuttling in 3 crews into H1 with a light helicopter. And we proceeded to do that all day long until right around 13:30, 13:40, when the wind picked up, increasing fire behavior. We also had a spot that became active below H1 and then proceeded to later burn over H1. But we continue with the troop transports, like I said, until about 13:30, 13:40. And then at about, 1400, the wind picked up. We closed the helispot, and then shortly after, the helispot was burnt over.
So after H1 burned over, you said you were there, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you guys have any did you fall back and have a discussion about, are things changing enough for us to take another look or do a different tactic?
As far as our tactic and goal there for that day was to fly the crews in. So once the helispot burnt over, to set a kind of a time frame, it wasn't long after that that the other burnover occurred, where the fatalities were. So I mean, once the burnover occurred of H1, we were done for the day. We then just huddled up in our safety zone, which was right in here with the 2.5 crews that were on the mountain, and then waited and hiked out later that evening.
Was there any chatter, or what was the thinking about that slap over into Patchbar drainage?
All I can answer is what I was hearing on the radio.
Right.
And you could hear Jeff and Long Tom talking about it, where they could, and Air Attack as well. They could see the smoke, but it wasn't really doing anything. And then Air Attack then would start and relay, hey, it's picking up a little bit. It's moving over here. It's doing this. So everybody was aware of what mostly the fire was doing. But like Rick said, you just had that perfect weather combination that just appeared or just happened, and then the fire proceeded just to blow up.
Did you communicate with those guys, like Alan and those guys, of what you were seeing, or hey, there's some of your uncertainties, or is that more just a dialogue of you guys on that H1?
Kicker and I were mainly having that dialogue, but we were relaying that dialogue to the helibase. And everything happened so quickly. We were having that same dialogue right about the same time that Alan and them were having their dialogue. Hey, there's smoke below them is picking up. So it was really occurring at the same time.
You know, and there's that saying that timing is everything. Well, what happened at the precise moment that they really needed to get out of there? Both helicopters, one down for fuel, the second down with all the panels off doing a 30-hour inspection. This is 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Neither helicopter was capable of taking off and responding on a very short notice. And just the time it takes to fuel a helicopter, let alone try to get the panels back on and complete the inspection, I don't know if they did at that point or not. Both helicopters were unavailable at a critical point, and it's a timing thing. And basically timing sucked. At another time frame, it might have been everything would have come out fine if both helicopters had been there and available and gotten up there, but it sucked.
One of the last groups asked at H1 when, or did we really know what was going on, or did we think that that the fatalities had occurred? And I said no. That from working with Jeff and Shane for a few years that I had worked with him, and also going to high school with Jeff Allen, I truly believe that they were all right, that they had made the right decisions, and that everything had gone in their favor. And that when they were out of radio communication, I just figured that, hey, they were busy, that they were doing something, that they were getting out of the way, and that they would get back to, or they'd answer the radio then when they had the chance. One of my take-home things that I don't know, it's just been with me since this happened, is that regardless of if you do everything right and your abilities and your experience, sometimes things just line up to where you have no control, and things are just, everything's against you. And this was one of those cases where you had two good firefighters making the right calls from where they were, and it worked out against them.
Just look at the progression of the fire up the Cash Bar drainage, and keep in mind while this is happening, this is kind of a side incident, that the main fire in Cramer Creek is still going on. And as the day is progressing, the shortwave disturbance does move into the area, and all the fires are going crazy. And there's a question at one of the earlier stands for Bus 1, well, all the fires are going crazy, why is that? This thing had hit, and it was a fairly widespread system. It wasn't a true dry cold front, but it had the same effect. The winds were increasing, and they were shifting in a clockwise direction. So you look at these graphics, remember that north is not up, north is this way. So a southwest wind is going to be coming out of this direction. As the winds shift to westerly, we've got almost perfect alignment. And really, in the world of really bad timing, these smokes that had crept over the ridge that were just very, very slowly working their way down under the brush in the leaf litter, they've been working their way down all day. People in the air saw them all day. It's just very light white smokes coming up through the brush. No big deal. They've been working their way down, and finally got to the bottom of the drainage. Right about the time the wind shifted to westerly and aligned with that drainage. What happened? Perfect storm. Started forming an active fire front. And that ceanothus with the heavy downwoodies, and you had a major intense fire front starting to move up the canyon. They check in and say they need another 45 minutes. Probably the third time that day they'd said that. They need more time. At 1500, the winds are picking up. The wind starts to align with the drainage. 1505, here they'd said at 2:45 they need another 45 minutes. 20 minutes later they called and said we're ready for pickup. And I don't know why, no one knows why, but something changed in their minds. They said it's time to go. The winds were picking up, fire was picking up in Cramer Creek. Maybe they saw the column starting to build in Cramer Creek. That's my best guess, but something changed. And it wasn't just, we need to go now, just cut and run. All their stuff was packed up at H2. The chaps wrapped around saw blades, tools wrapped with tape. Everything was ready to go for pickup.
at H2, the first time they're given any information that the helicopter is being fueled up, and that's what's keeping it. You know, up until then, they've been ordering it.
They've been thinking it's coming.
Yeah,
it's
and
ready,
it's like,
it's
okay,
coming.
and they've been told, hey, it's spooling up. We're gonna come and get you.
Hey, the helicopter hasn't even left the ground yet.
Right, it's going to take another. That's some big information. I think I'd like to believe they heard it's going to be another 20 minutes before, you know, the helicopter's done refueling, or they know how long it takes a helicopter to refuel. Maybe they would have done a little something to go, oh, maybe we should.
And what's happening is that they can't see from where they are, and probably don't know, is that this thing is really getting ahead of steam. And one person that saw it from the air described it as, I mean, there's these big, scrappy rock areas. But he said there was these sheets of flame that were blowing across these rock outcroppings, and it looked like the rocks were on fire. Everything looked like it was on fire. It was just this massive swath of flame that was moving up this drainage.
I kind of felt like my career as chief was bookended by fatalities. We had 30 Mile a couple of months after I became chief, and we had Esperanza just a few months before I retired. And you know, people would ask me, and they'll ask me now, and they'll say, you know, what were you most proud of at the time you were chief? And I can't think of anything. And then they say, well, what was your biggest failure? And I know the answer to that. My biggest failure was that we did not accomplish the things that I believed that we should accomplish in terms of safety for the organization. Firefighting being one of the main ones, but a lot of other areas too. That's why I'm really happy to participate in something like this, because we got to get there. I mean, we just have to get there. We've got to learn the lessons and live with the lessons.
Tom mentioned the issue of trust with management. From the onset of coming to the forest, that was very recognizable, that there was an issue between the folks on the ground all the way up through management, FMOs, zone FMOs, district rangers, all the way up to forest soup level. And I think we've gradually begun to bridge that gap a little bit. I think we've accomplished that through hiring and retaining good people, in both in leadership positions and folks on the ground. I think we've gone through, as a forest, numerous different fire seasons that have provided challenges, successes, different things like that enables us to, I guess, grow together and gradually build that trust.
The Cramer Fire Virtual Staff Ride participants moved through 8 hours of presentations that featured several speakers and follow-up discussion at these various stands. The following morning, the Staff Ride's participants gathered together for the final integration phase. This is the opportunity for everyone to talk openly and honestly and share their insights regarding what they observed and learned on the Staff Ride.
For those that don't know, I was on the original investigation team with the Forest Service, was the only non-federal person on that team, and because of that, felt like I was the only one that really could talk about it from day one. And what I got out of yesterday was just more than anything a huge sense of relief that finally we can talk about it.
You were in your safety zone when you heard that.
It was taboo, and you know, people on the original investigation either didn't want to talk about it or felt like they couldn't talk about it. The more I knew about it, the more I realized that there wasn't any one single thing done wrong. There were a lot of little things that were an accumulation that led to the final outcome, and we need to talk about it to learn from it and to get past it. And yesterday, finally the lid is off and we can talk about it.
Everybody in this room has a different piece that they've taken away from this. Prior to this, talking about Cramer was kind of taboo, or at least that perception. To me, the take home is we have a lot of people in this room now talking about Cramer. Some see the fence posts, some see the rails. If we continue to talk about Cramer and talk about the fence posts, the rails, the different things we see, we may not be right in what happened on the hill. We may not, we'll never know. But if we continue to put those parts together, from agency administrators all the way down to the folks running the shovels on the ground, they're going to have reminders in their head the next time we put folks on the hill.
One more question. Right after the fire, there was no discussion, there was no transparency between the agency and the employees. We just saw people either losing their jobs or resigning and retiring, and like I said, there was no discussion and no transparency, so we were left to kind of build our own opinions and our own ideas of what was happening, and a lot of that was negative. It was like, well, so-and-so made this decision, and they were acting within their scope, but yet the agency kind of left them or hung them out to dry. And I think in future cases that we need to maintain that transparency and discuss, hey, yes, this decision was made, this person is being disciplined, but it's a learning deal, in my opinion, and that wasn't done, and I believe it harbored a lot of resentment, ill intent, and just negative feelings. Firefighters take a lot of pride in their job and what they do and who they work for, and it's hard then to feel like you're abandoned because of a decision that you made that isn't viewed now as the right decision, when you made that decision, you have, using the information you had and your expertise, that felt like the right decision. That's why you made that decision.
That is the reason why, and I was part of them, we didn't trust management. Alan did the best job he could do with his abilities, the resources he had, and the backing. I'm not defending him, but I am, because I could be there. And he got hung out to dry. Honestly, that's what I think happened myself. So having this, my views have changed quite a bit in the last 9 years, because I was here when it happened. Because they didn't talk about it. Like Donnie said, here's a guy doing his best. Well, you didn't do your best, so, either quit or get fired, honestly. And what are the guys here left supposed to think? Because it was closed-lipped. It was, closed door, meetings. You don't need to know about it. Just keep doing your job, keep, plugging along. So I think as we do talk about it and management becomes more open, and it has. It's definitely changed here quite a bit, for the better, I think, being here quite a while.
Yesterday made me realize and remember how complex the fires are on this forest and how difficult they are to fight. I mean, the logistics for fighting fires on the Salmon Chalice are unlike any place else. So there's a lot of space for little mistakes to be made, and I think about, in my experience on fires all over the place, that we constantly made mistakes, but they weren't something that, sometimes we got away with it, sometimes we didn't. And I think that these guys on Cramer, they made little mistakes, but nothing that isn't outside the norm of fighting a fire with these complex conditions. And so I can't find anything that I saw that I think anybody really did wrong. I mean, there was a lot of little mistakes, just like normal, just like every fire. There's lots of little mistakes, and sometimes you, like I say, you get away with it, and sometimes you don't. And I think sometimes it's important to understand that, you're going to be making those mistakes, and other people are going to be making those mistakes, but it's up to everybody to sort of recognize that and be able to adapt. And sometimes, I'm afraid, things just don't quite work out the way you had hoped. And so I'm pretty sympathetic to how things unfolded on Cramer for these guys, and I feel real bad for the way things lined up for them. But I don't think it's outside of the norm for this forest to have those kind of conditions create the potential for little mistakes.
So I'm new to the Forest Service. I've only been in the Forest Service for 2 years, and I came in as a staff officer. So I'm new to this forest also, and but I'm from Salmon, so this kind of had a special meaning to me. I didn't know Jeff, and but I do know the Allens, and so a couple years ago I decided to start a run in their memory, and so we've done it twice now. And because of that, I spent a lot of time talking to the Allens and talking to the Heaths, and I've gotten to know the families really well, but I still didn't know their kids. And so yesterday, the whole time, I've just really wanted to know what happened to those boys, you know, and it didn't ever make any sense to me what they were doing up there. I didn't know why they were there. I assumed they were fighting fire. I didn't know. So for me, yesterday was really educational. I finally, at least I know why they were up there. I know a little bit more about what happened to them. I heard Jeff's voice for the first time yesterday.
H2, go ahead. Yeah, bud, we're ready for pickup. Alright, we'll send 193 on its way. Get out, send him in a hurry, bud. Yeah, go ahead, H2. Oh, well, what's the status of 193? They're still here on the ground. They're going to be spooling up shortly to come pick you up. Alright, we need them right now. Halibut, did you copy? We copy. We're sending 166 to get you right now. Look at that thing. H2, elevate. You copy? Base, you talking to H2? Yeah, Jeff, the helicopter needed some fuel, but it's going to start spooling here right now. Any problems right at the moment? Oh, bud, we just got fire down below us, and the smoke's coming right at us, so just make them hurry up. Now, they're spooling right now.
So 1520, 166 is over H2, but it's too smoky, and they can't land. So they tell the two guys, sorry, we can't pick you up. So they announce they're leaving H2. They don't say which direction, they just say we're leaving. We're gonna get out of here on foot. And at this point, 1523, fire finally hits that triangle of trees right below H2. Winds are driving directly at the slope. And at this point, they do have a sense the fire's on them. And they have about maybe a minute.
So for me, that was a really kind of an important piece that I was missing. And then the second part of that is I'm a brand new agency administrator. This will be my first fire season. And that scares the crap out of me. You know, just the thought of I'm the one whose people are going to be looking to make those decisions, and I need to make sure that I have all the information I need to make a good decision, and that all the people on the ground have all the information they need to make good decisions. Because I feel pretty strongly that Jeff and Shane didn't have all the information they needed.
Taking a step back and looking at this thing throughout the day and seeing where communications broke down, and what pieces of information didn't get to people or bits of information came across as incorrect. You know, all the information was out there. If you look at the day and who knew what and who was where when, you know, that fire creeped over the ridge and dropped down, who had that information and where did it go. You know, their mission up on the hill was to cut a pad for a small plane. The plane switching out and not knowing they were still up on the hill, that bit of communication, all that information was out there. People knew it, and it didn't get to the people who needed to know it to make decisions to ensure this didn't happen, was kind of the takeaway.
I wanted to tag on to some of what has been said and then kind of some of how this got framed in the first place. I worked at the Washington office in NIFC, Boise, in fire operations risk management, and how we react to tragedy as an organization is really important. And I would say that most days I work on some aspect of trying to improve that. I personally believe that what happened here was a travesty, and as well as 30 Mile and some of our other events. For one thing, why should it take 9 years to be able to talk about something that people need to learn from? And that's not unique to this situation here. That's been the case. The first staff ride we did at South Canyon was 7 years after the fact. So what is wrong with our process and our organization that gets in the way of almost instantaneous learning from something like this? Our agency investigation is a safety investigation, and it's for the purpose of future accident prevention. That's what it should be for. Unfortunately, in the past, and this is one example, where that investigation was used for other purposes. And that's something we're trying to stop, and I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think we're improving. The OSHA investigation, that's going to happen anyway, and OIG, just to be clear about that law, passed after 30 miles, it says that that OIG is required to do their own independent investigation after a Forest Service employee is killed in a burnover. So think about that it doesn't really happen very often. The only other OIG investigation that's happened under that law, besides Cramer, was Esperanza. Unfortunately, even though the law says that those investigations are supposed to be independent, they aren't. We know, we have the paper trail to prove that those investigations, both OSHA and OIG, use the Forest Service accident investigation as fodder to do whatever they need to do. And we've been trying, we'd like to have a firewall between those investigations so that our safety investigations, which are for the purpose of future accident prevention, can't be used for these other purposes. Hopefully we will never again have investigations where all those entities are in the same room doing the same investigation. Because I keep asking, what is the meaning of the word independent if you're using our investigations and our findings to fuel whatever your agenda is?
What I wanted to say was, having been married to the district ranger, I can absolutely verify she has green underwear. And I accuse her of drinking far too much Kool-Aid, green Kool-Aid, over the years. She was totally dismayed that the agency went after her. And to answer part of the questions I keep hearing, who are some of the people that were subject to discipline? She was, and I was, two of us. There are others. Both of us had liability insurance, and I'm damn glad we had it, because the people that defended us did a really good job. And to have our own agency turn on us, thinking we'd all done a good job, was a shock to her especially. Not so much to me. I can say I kind of expected it and was ready for it, but she's back to drinking a lot of green Kool-Aid today, but still suffering from the fact that the agency turned their back on her. She doesn't like me to speak for her. She makes that quite clear. So I'm kind of, my perspective is the husband.
I get to the what next and what do we do with this, what we've done here, and I don't know if the door's been open so we can talk about it. Something the Marine Corps did. We left a kid in the desert to die. Left him in the Mojave Desert. 29 Palms. Josh may have read the investigation, but for every Marine that checked aboard 29 Palms a year later, that was part of their check-in sheet. They read that investigation. And so every Marine that stood in that Mojave Desert knew and had that hair on the back of their neck picture to reference of an entire unit leaving the desert and going back to North Carolina and not knowing they left a kid there until they got to North Carolina, and how important that was. So I guess the point is, what next and what do we do with this information? And Russ kind of hit a piece of it. There's parts of it that's management. There's parts of it that are individual tactical decisions. How do we insert that into how we train line officers, how we train young firefighters, how we train young ICs institutionally? Meaning, how does it fit into the process? Does it go into fire school? Does it go into, as soon as you step on the helitac base, that investigation's put in your hand to say, come back and see your supervisor when you're done? What do we do with it now as an organization, I think is our next step. And it's not, I don't think to do it right it's easy. because you've got the line officer piece of it, you've got the tactical piece of it, you've got the IC piece of it, and this can be used to help those individuals. And then how do we take this and put that in place so it's learned cyclically? I think is the question.
But I think for me, the important piece of the puzzle is it's almost like there was two parallel paths. The perfect storm that led to the fatality and the perfect storm of the aftermath. I would characterize, and I strongly believe that Cramer and how we dealt with Cramer as an agency is probably a low point in terms of fire management. And it was a perfect storm. No different than the individual actions that led up to the fatalities between the OIG legislation, between the dynamics of the agency, the relationship with OSHA. Everything was a perfect storm. And I think there's as many lessons, if not more lessons, to be learned from how an agency deals with bad outcomes like this as there are the individual actions that happened on the ground that led to the fatality. What I feel really good about in this staff ride was the amount of discussion we had about management and not just about turning dirt. And for me, probably because I'm in management and want other line officers and other agency administrators and other regional foresters and other chiefs to recognize how those actions lead and what they do to a unit in an agency, there's lots of more to discussion to be had there.
I feel like this experience was really a good experience. I learned a lot. I feel like there's still a lot people are starting to talk, but I feel like there's still a lot left unsaid. And I think that's due to our society, kind of as we've talked about. Seems like it's kind of an I gotcha, pointing fingers, and less of a team at times. And I think what I'd like to take with me is and I've heard several times also that your opinions don't matter. And at this level, sometimes it really does feel like that. And I really do hope that our opinions do matter and we can voice them freely, and eventually, I mean, instead of feeling like that we're gonna not be heard or even penalized for that.
I saw a lot of good things come up in discussions yesterday with the people that are on the force in the district now, and hearing some of the comments that Fritz and others said today. It's a whole different tone than it was 9 years ago, and your opinions matter, your perspectives matter, and please don't ever feel like you can't express them.